Um, Thank you for your patience. Our next session is entitled Building Our Sector's Capacity. Our panellists are going to be discussing how the industry can build on its talent capacity through attracting, developing and retaining people from all parts of society. Allow me to introduce our speakers. We have Tim Murnan of Punch Consulting, Dr. Amy Byrne from Technical University of Dublin, Kate English, who's with Deloitte, Graham Tinney of Griffith and Armour, and Nasa Kane-Fine of RPS. Each is going to speak for about 3 minutes on an element of this subject of particular relevance to them, and we'll then open up to a general discussion as we did before. Now, our first speaker, Tim Murnan, Managing Director of Punch Consulting Engineers. His background is in civil engineering, having worked in London for the OVA-Arab Partnership in designing a range of heavy civil engineering railway structures internationally. Here in Ireland, he's worked on many prestigious projects, including large-scale multi-use developments, public sector projects, and motorway bridges. He's Vice President of the ACEI and was involved in the preparation of the ACEI's landmark Bridging the Gap report, which you heard cited earlier. He's going to speak to us about boosting capacity within the engineering sector. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Ingrid. So I think there's two things that I'd like to talk about in the context of building capacity. The first one is around better communication by us engineers, and the second is better remuneration for engineers. So in terms of communication, I think it's just very interesting in terms of the work engineers do and the value it has and how we've kind of lost our way, I think, probably over the last century or maybe more. So when you think back historically, you think of buildings that say the Eiffel Tower in Paris is called after Gustave Eiffel, who designed it. I come from West Cork, and the road between the Cork and Kerry Mountains, I won't talk too much about that. But anyway, it's called the Healy Pass. I'm sure people know the Healy Pass. That's called after Tim Healy, who was the engineer who designed it. And then you think of over the last millennia, people like Brunel, Stevenson, Henry Ford, Leonardo da Vinci, all engineering people who are very well known and respected, and everyone knew who they were. If we asked people now to name who are the well-known engineers of modern times, I'm sure we would struggle. And I think that's an example of how at some point we lost our way in communicating what we do and the value that we create. And that has a pretty major repercussion. So I suppose individually and collectively, and the Bridging the Gap report identify this, that we need to tell our story more effectively. And I think it's a real kind of call to arms for our own firms and the ACEI and the wider engineering community to really step up, because we've lost our way. We need to fix it because we have so much important work to do, and we need the best brains to do it. So in terms of, we're talking lots about climate change at the moment, and I'm thinking in terms of an opportunity for us to use the forum to say the problem with climate change has been well articulated. The planet is burning. The planet will become uninhabitable if we continue on our certain path. So I don't think there's a bigger challenge that needs to be solved. And who are the professions to solve it? It is engineers and engineering skills. So I think that's at a macro level. There's a huge opportunity for us to say the next century is ours as engineers, and we need to rise to the challenge and come to the forefront of the people to articulate that. That leads me on, I guess, to remuneration. I was chatting to a delegate earlier, and a very compelling story in terms of remuneration and how we're valued or otherwise. And there was a very eminent former president, actually, of the ACI, I won't get into names, had a certain hourly rate that he was going to charge at an arbitration hearing, and there was kind of hell to pay. The rate was too high, it wasn't acceptable. Anyway, the debate went on and eventually he got appointed. But interestingly, his son, who was 2 years qualified as a solicitor, was also at the same arbitration, and his hourly rate was 3 times that of his father, who was one of the great engineers of the 20th century. So no, I don't say that as a criticism of the legal firm. I say hats off to them, fair play to them. They've communicated their value, and society is willing to pay it. So the challenge for engineers is to say, no, we need to do the same. So there's lessons to learn there, because we cannot have pay as a barrier to entry. If the planet burning and saving humankind is the challenge, and engineers are the profession to do it, we need to get the best brains into our profession. And we cannot have a situation where a top-class engineer graduates from university and is deciding, okay, am I going to work for an engineering firm and save the planet, or am I going to go for work for maybe a top 4 accountancy firm or whatever and be much better off in 20 years' time? So that has to be removed. Remuneration has to be removed as a barrier to entry, and we all need to run better businesses at a micro level, but we need to sell the value of engineering at a macro level and to solve this problem. So I think they're my notions on how to build our sector's capacity at a very high level.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Dr. Amy Byrne, who lectures in Civil and Structural Engineering at the Technical University of Dublin. She's involved in national and international research in a number of areas, including circular construction, energy-efficient buildings, and sustainability. She's been researching sustainable buildings since 2009, including retrofit and material design. She is currently on the board of, and I forgot to check how you pronounce it, Dynasty? Good enough, okay. The EU Network for Dynamic Analysis, Simulation and Testing as applied to the energy and environmental performance of buildings. She's going to speak to the importance of developing the skills to engineer, having regard to a changing environment, and about the potential for the engineer's contribution to society. Amy.
Okay, so I'm very much coming at the capacity side from a university point of view. So we're really looking at the stream coming into university and then the stream coming out of it. And I think there are 4 key areas where we're losing the potential engineers of the future and where we're losing great minds. And those are at the primary school level, when people are getting that sense of identity, that sense of who they are, what they're interested in, and what careers there are out there. And they're being asked that question, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? At the end of that, they also have to choose what secondary school they go to. They have to choose what subjects they want to pick in secondary school as well. The next stage that is critical is going from that junior cycle in secondary school into the senior cycle of it, where they're choosing their Leaving Cert points, or their Leaving Cert subjects. So again, you know, if you're not doing physics, if you're not doing those subjects, if they're not available to you, you're not going to end up being an engineer. The third area is the CAO time, so filling out the CAO, and then the 4th time is leaving college. So if they did go for an engineering degree, oftentimes they don't end up being engineers. They'll retrain, they'll do accountancy exams, they might even do legal exams and move in a different direction, because engineering is often seen as a good primary degree, a good stepping stone degree to other areas. So with that in mind, I think there's 2 areas that we can look deeper into and that we really need to target, and it's really apt, the 2 talks that came before us this morning, because I think diversity is a huge area. We have only 12% representation of women in engineering, but you know, this could be much higher. We're losing 10% just leaving college. We're losing them at all stages of their path coming up to university. The second area that we need to focus on is, if we can't compete on price with other degrees, with other career choices, then maybe we can compete on purpose. And this is kind of echoing what Tim was saying. You know, engineers have the capability of solving all of the sustainable development goals. Without us, they're not getting resolved. And what tends to happen is people are interested in sustainability, so kids that are interested in sustainability, if they're girls, they end up going into science, and if they're boys, they go into engineering. So it's a massive untapped resource. If we went from 12% representation to 50%, we'd have so many more great minds in the industry. We wouldn't have an issue with capacity.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Kate English, who's currently Director and Head of Real Estate Research at Deloitte. Her role involves analysing the real estate market through an economic lens based on data-driven research across both the occupier and transactional commercial and residential property markets in Ireland. She's an expert in current and historical market trends in the residential, office, logistics and capital markets. I'd say the last 20 years have been a roller coaster. She's actively involved in recruitment for graduate programs and summer interns, and she's going to give us an insight into the thinking of some of those younger people she's encountering as regards future employment and what drives their interests. Thank you.
Thank you. So good afternoon all. I think I would like to start by actually saying that, prior to maybe Deloitte, that I am a classic example of someone who has fallen into the construction industry, the built environment industry, your real estate industry, whatever you want to call it. My background is economics. It's what I did my studies in, and by accident almost got a job as a junior economist in a real estate firm. Never intended to stay in it, said I'd give it a year, 2 years max and move on to the next industry, and my plan was actually to move country at that point as well. But got sucked into the industry itself and all the trends within it from my particular fields that got me there. But it got me thinking a little bit about this question, and when I read the Bridge the Gap report and the conversations we had in advance of this, and it's again back to that notion of I fell into this. It wasn't necessarily something that was a conversation at home in terms of an industry you should get involved in. And it's again a key question that comes up, and if we look at the Housing for All, one of the action plans that came out of that policy by government was the Careers in Construction report. And one of the key findings in their most recent version of that was, how can parents' views be changed in order for them to see opportunities within the construction sector? And I know that it's very difficult to get that messaging across at present. You open any paper at the moment and we see how commercial is falling and falling rapidly. We've vacancy rates up in double-digit figures, values down over 16, 17% on paper, but yet if you look across the span of values, they're anything down from 20% up to 40%. But yet within that, we know that through the European Building Directive, we have a huge retrofit plan that needs to take place. On a residential front, we're also seeing an awful lot of pipeline of work coming through. Ireland is a standout at the moment in a European context when we look at actually our commencement numbers, where over the last year they've upheld, done relatively well compared to other countries where they've frankly fallen off a cliff. And I think it's back to what Tim said, that messaging of getting through, or that messaging through to parents, to schools, to people in primary schools, that there is a pipeline of work there. But also I think when I think about it from a Deloitte perspective, and again, one of the big four and maybe the value that we managed to command, and a big mantra within Deloitte, and certainly when I look at that hiring process, either for your summer interns or your graduate program, and an awful lot of focus is put on during that recruitment process of making an impact, and the impact that the everyday work you do is. And I think at the moment, be it whether it's in the engineering space or the overall built environment or construction industry, there's an awful lot of negative connotation towards it, and we're oftentimes the industry that gets the hardest rep from the public or from the government. We're an easy target at times. And it's about trying to get that message across from not only through to those hirees that you're trying to get, but also to that public space of the overall impact that we make. Look across your cities, your towns, your villages, everything that stands there and that is used by the public has been built, created by some one of the professionals that work within the construction industry. So it's all about managing that image, making that impact, and trying to get that communication across both your hirees, your public, and at a state level as well.
Can I just ask you one question before I move on? It just occurred to me, at the moment, with nearly full employment, are you hiring the graduates, or are the graduates recruiting you?
That is a very good question. It is an extremely competitive space to hire graduates at the moment, and also your summer interns as well. And across all of your big four or the other consultancy firms as well, there is a lot of competition. And I think there's an awful lot of work therefore put in behind the scenes to getting out to schools, to universities, and getting to those people as early as possible to communicate again that value that you can deliver by being within our firm.
Thank you very much. I was just curious about that. Now, our fourth speaker is Graham Tinney of Griffith & Armour. He's CEO and Professional Risks Director of the Professional Risks Division at the company. A chartered insurance broker and fellow of the Chartered Insurance Institute, he's a specialist in construction professional indemnity insurance, which I'm sure is a topic close to the hearts of many in this room because so many of you told me this morning. He works closely with numerous industry bodies and has represented the interests of consultants with major procurement bodies. He's now going to speak about the key issue of risk and how to manage it. Graham.
Thanks, Ingrid. I think we've heard from a number of speakers this morning. We heard from Tim in particular just about the pressure on fees and remuneration generally for the profession, and I think that is obviously a key issue. And there's a general concern, I suppose, that professional services have become relegated to a commodity purchase. And one of the messages that came across from the Bridging the Gap report that stuck with me was this idea of the profession being trusted but not fully valued. I think it just encapsulated some of the problems we're talking about. As professional indemnity brokers, I suppose naturally our focus is on the risk landscape within which construction consultants generally are operating. And we often talk about this risk dumping mentality where there's just too much risk coming down the supply chain and landing with engineers, landing with other consultants. And it's a risk that they can't bear, they can't control, and a lot of the time they can't insure and can't fund either. And that creates this risk-reward imbalance within the profession, which is at the heart of a lot of the challenges that we'll be talking about. And it also impacts on capacity. So when we sit down with firms, we know that there are certain firms that are not tendering for projects because the exposures are too great. We know that there are firms that aren't tendering for projects because they can't get adequate or effective or affordable professional indemnity insurance to cover them for the risks that will be involved in those projects. We know that we struggle to attract overseas resource. So when we sit with some of our clients in mainland Europe, they're not attracted into the Irish market because of the risk landscape that exists. All of that impacting on capacity. And similarly then, all of that impacting on the margins of all of your firms, the salaries you're able to pay, and the knock-on effects that has in terms of attracting people into the industry. If you look for where the source of the problem is, I suppose it primarily comes through the contracts that are being imposed on consultants generally, that are just simply far too onerous. And we might get into that in a little bit more detail. But in addition to that, it is this issue of joint and several liability. And Anne-Marie touched on it first thing this morning when she talked about the 1% rule. The idea that somebody can be held 1% responsible for something, but can end up having to pay over 100% share of the loss simply because no other parties are around. And as one of my clients said to me, it's a very, very high bar to try and demonstrate that you're not 1% responsible for something. I think it also drives claimant behaviour. Anne-Marie mentioned the scattergun approach and what that does. So we end up creating this issue, I suppose, that's driving legal costs, people being sucked into actions that they have very little responsibility for, but very, very significant costs being incurred in trying to extract them from that. And what we're doing, I suppose, is out of line with a lot of other European jurisdictions where there would be net contribution clauses or a fairer contracting environment, if you like. But before we all get too depressed, I suppose, with all of that, I think this is a moment of opportunity. So, we've talked this morning about all the challenges we're facing, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in housing, whether it's meeting our climate change targets. All of the people in this room and construction consultants generally are going to be at the heart of delivering solutions. So for me, it's an opportunity to reset. It's an opportunity to think about how do we support that community? How do we come up with a risk landscape with a structure that's going to support a vibrant construction consultancy sector supported by a robust insurance market that is only going to be able to deliver on all of these ambitions and also going to be able to support innovation and collaboration that PJ talked about earlier. And if we're to do that, we have to move away from this adversarial system. I just want to acknowledge, I think it's really important that if we're going to get there, there has to be ongoing dialogue. And I want to acknowledge, I suppose, the work done by the OGP in recent years. And if we look at things like, for example, the introduction of B-Card, there was a set of stakeholder discussions around that were hugely positive, I think, in terms of achieving the outcome that we did. I think the discussions that David set up in relation to the challenges in the professional indemnity market, the move towards caps on liability, again, hugely positive. But there's a whole series of other challenges there. We just need to make sure that that debate continues to take place.
Thank you very much. I knew that was going to be the one that everybody, I couldn't believe it. Everybody said it to me this morning. So it's obviously quite a tinderbox there. So thanks for going through that. Our final speaker is Nasa Kane-Fine. Nasa is Director of Project Communications at RPS, providing both strategic and operational leadership. She leads a team of consultants providing stakeholder engagement and specialist communication services for major large-scale capital investment infrastructure projects. She and her team also advise on risk and crisis management, social impact assessments, and public consultation in the course of enabling delivery. She's also an associate lecturer in DCU. She's going to focus on the importance of communication and engagement on the ground in delivering major infrastructure projects. Nasa.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Ingrid. Well, first of all, I would say that from a recruitment and a retention perspective, having jobs with purpose is something that is a recurring theme now all of the time when we are recruiting. And I think that from a communications perspective, the engineering profession has some work to do, as other speakers have said this morning, to build a profile of the value of engineering in society. A lot of people don't understand what it is engineers do, and they don't understand that every single part of our life is impacted by engineering. It's been designed, it's been delivered by engineering from the moment we wake up to when we go asleep at night. And I think that value needs to be, the profile needs to be raised, and the value just reinforced into people so that they consider engineering as a career, and that they consider it something valuable for their family and their kids and their grandkids to study when they are making those choices that you were speaking about earlier. But having technical expertise and being a brilliant engineer technically is not enough anymore. We find in RPS that, ongoing training is a huge aspect of retaining staff and keeping people engaged. But that ongoing training includes things like engineers need to have other skills like strong project management, contract appreciation, understanding the details of a contract and knowing how to negotiate it. Also, artificial intelligence is a growing skill that engineers need. They need to understand the benefits of it and the threats that it brings. And then communications is a vital skill that is literally essential and core to every activity that an engineer does. And that communications is both for their internal engagement, to be able to be part of a multidisciplinary team. You need to have strong communication skills. Also, with your client relationship management, communications is core to having good engagement with your clients. But also understanding on your risk register that every risk has the potential to have a communications impact, so that you're identifying not just the technical risks and mitigation factors, but also the communications risks and communications mitigating factors. And part of that is having experts like my team on board to support what you're doing. But the engineer still needs to be able to communicate and to work as part of that integrated approach to communications for a project to go forward and break ground and be delivered. And I suppose when we think about communications, everyone has mentioned it this morning almost, stakeholder engagement, consultation, getting through planning, etc., etc. But communications, it's not an obstacle that you have to overcome. Stakeholder engagement is not a box tick that you have to deliver. Everything you're doing is for people. Literally every project you design and deliver is to impact people's lives in a positive way, to improve their lives, whether that's ensuring the lights stay on, or they have clean water running through their taps, or a road or a cycleway to travel to work and school. Everything you design and deliver is for people. So therefore, we need to be always putting people at the centre of your project, at the centre of your project team. Stop thinking about communications and stakeholder engagement. Think about people. We're delivering for people, so how do we reach them? How do we get them to accept the project? How do we get them to not delay the project or even stop the project, as we have seen in countless projects over the decades? So we need to think people first, and in that we need to think about listening first of all. Key to communications is listening. Communications is not brochures and videos and all that stuff. It's about listening carefully to people and then showing them that you heard them, incorporating their feedback into your project in whatever way you can. Maybe that's all you're able to do is go out and do more technical studies to show them that actually what they're asking for is not possible. But in lots of cases, there are some tweaks, some compromises that can be reached. Communications in people, listening to people and showing them that you heard them is actually an investment in your project. It can ensure that your project does get delivered. It can stop you having to spend years and years in court. And it can also build that essential trust that you need to build your project and to deliver it. You also need to, in building that, in listening to people and taking on board their feedback, you need to help them understand, build their understanding of what you're doing, why you're doing it. And in doing that, you need to start from where they are. Don't be talking in the engineering speak and technical jargon, but speaking in plain English, listening to what people care about, what are they worried about, why is it of a concern to them, and listening to all of the different views and building understanding amongst all of those different perspectives. And then finally, it's about an ongoing communications. It's not something you turn on and off. Consultation is on now and it's over in 6 weeks. That isn't communications. You need to have an ongoing space for people to give you feedback, to listen to them, to hear them, and to provide them with information. And as I say, that will all lead towards trust, and trust is essential to building the project, because at the end of the day, a lot of project failures, if not all project failures, are because of communications failures, either within the project team and or out to your external stakeholders.
Thank you very much indeed, Nasa. I'm going to go to you, Tim, because money, is important here. And you've highlighted the differential in pay between engineers and other professionals. But, I mean, how do you bid up your rate when the pressure on budgets is so tight on projects? How do you persuade whoever's commissioning your project that there should be a leap in your pay?
That's an interesting question. So I go back to, I'm not sure when standard contracts kind of stopped being used or are more in vogue, let's say, in our consultant contracts. Sorry, I sound like I'm having a go at lawyers now. I don't mean to. But fees are very tight. We were working generally on the form of contract, ACEI 9101. And then all of a sudden, every contract, it appeared within maybe 5 years, had a bespoke contract. So obviously to have a bespoke contract, someone has to be paid to prepare a bespoke contract. So magically, the fee was there to serve that, because it was communicated that added value to the project. So it's a concept of value, I think, very clearly. You'll pay for it if you believe there's value in it and there's a return to it. So that was an example. There was no more to pay fees. All of a sudden, there's a whole new area which was legal in that context, where there was fees to cover that additional service. So we just need to communicate the value of what we do. It goes back to that big picture, and I believe the money will always be found, because you pay for someone who adds value.
But if you increase wages, I mean, we hear this formula applied, for example, in the corner shop. If you increase the minimum wage, you increase the risk of the business collapsing and the overhead can't be afforded. If you increase your engineers' pay in a project, you won't get the project. So are you caught in a bit of a vice?
Well, it's a process. It clearly is a process, where you have to, as I said, communicate that value and you build it up over time. There isn't a magic bullet. But there are certain jobs that we would do. There's a range of projects we do. There are certain projects where a client will immediately see your value and you can charge double your rate. So I think it starts with kind of saying, okay, identifying the projects that offer that higher value, the higher rate. Now, maybe that's not work you always want to do, but there is a higher value work in that. And if more of the resources are in that, well, then supply and demand, where the workload is, will automatically, the value of that will increase as well. So, and I think this is about my kind of message. I don't necessarily have the answers, but I think we need to realize in consulting engineering that we are businesses and we need to be better businesses. And that's a challenge for all of us, including my business. And we all need, I think, as senior managers to realize we all have more to learn until such a point that we can be as effective as other professional services organizations. We're not there, so.
If I can come to Amy, you mentioned 4 points at which women are lost to engineering.
Yeah.
If you had a choice of strategizing to target one of those 4 points, which one would you prioritize and how?
Well, actually, we ran a survey with the Academic Society in Engineers Ireland, which is still open, still looking for responses, where we're asking the question, how do we increase the number of girls, or how do we facilitate that path towards engineering? And we're really looking at all the levels, and we're trying to get a bit of answers from across society, parents, non-parents, engineers, non-engineers. And the answers that we were getting back were that we need to target parents, because what you choose to do at university is number one, mostly influenced by your parents. It's what my mother would have said to me when I showed an interest in a building site behind our house. You know, I just wanted to get on the machinery. I didn't want to be an engineer, but it was from the age of 6 that I was being told, oh, she'll be an engineer now. And that was dug into me from there on. So, and that understanding of degree of influence is across several surveys. So one's done by Engineers Ireland, you know, one's done by UNESCO as well. There is that understanding that we need to target parents. And it's that, I think NASA was mentioned this as well, this misunderstanding as to what an engineer does. And, you know, it's like, you know, you won't be on a building site. 90% of engineers aren't on a building site.
But also there's this huge range from mechanical, civil, electrical,
Exactly.
AI now, and
exactly. That's completely it. And it's that idea that engineers do, or girls do science and boys do engineers. But engineering is just the practical science. You know, and we can do everything, we fit into the same categories as science does, and it's just done in a more practical, more outward-facing way.
Kate, my apologies. I think you wanted to get in on Tim's point about how you charge more, basically.
Yeah, not necessarily on how we charge more, but it was more back to, I suppose you did mention the Big Four in your initial statement as well, and I would say I'm only in Deloitte a year and a half, so I'm not fully ingrained in the Big Four mentality. I haven't come through that process the whole way through, but what has been my learning actually since I joined them, having never worked in a Big Four before and always come through other commercial and residential firms, is that the value that they do manage to communicate in what they do. And I think it kind of comes from a number of different aspects, and that one is that they are very good both internally and externally of that messaging of the value they bring, that making an impact is a tagline I've heard from day one since I've joined within there, and that's to help get it through to everyone who has joined in that firm as well. The second part of it too is that they pride themselves in being a training firm, and at the core of it, that's what they are. They have graduate intakes every year, and when you're doing those intakes, at the core of it, as well as explaining to people when they're coming in the training that they will get and the accreditations that they will also have received by the time they're finished that training cycle. And some of that then is used within that, I suppose, value proposition then externally when they're going to tender for work and achieve work. And what did stand out to me again in the Bridging the Gap report actually, which was something I was quite surprised on, was, I think, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was 53% of members within the ACEI had applied for the chartership. 54%, was it? 55%, which kind of, again, reflecting back on my own experience of within Deloitte and that mantra within the Big Four of we're a training firm, and they use that then in order to, I suppose, command some of that value when they go to market, that potentially that is a key learning from the report to be picked up on as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to you, Graham. That whole issue of risk, I mean, we've heard it's deterring tenders. We're hearing it's, you know, very, very difficult. What are you looking for? Are you looking for legislation from the government? Are you looking for more players to come into the market? What would ease the pressure in that insurance zone?
I think you've got to address the underlying risk first of all, and I think there's a number of factors to that. I think we've mentioned joint and several liabilities, so what impact is that having? Well, if you go back to, I think it was 2020, 2021, there was an Oireachtas committee meeting, and American International Group Insurance Company were present, and they were asked about the challenges in the professional indemnity market, and they said, well, we can't solve those challenges because we withdrew from the Irish market. And he was asked, well, why did you withdraw from the Irish market? And they said, because of joint and several liability, because of the 1% rule. That's why we don't write construction PI. And there's an insurer who is writing professional indemnity insurance in other areas, including in the UK, which has a whole series of challenges and in some ways is maybe in a worse position than we are. So certainly that thing of joint and several liability, getting to grips with that, whether that's through a change in legislation, as you say, which I think would be the ideal, or the introduction of net contribution clauses within contracts. So I think that's the primary thing, and I think we know that there's no barrier to the introduction of net contribution clauses, and we know of other territories in which they're operating and operating effectively.
Can I just ask you one other question? I'm told that increasingly public sector clients are asking companies to sign off on documentation above and beyond what's actually stipulated by regulation. Things like collateral warranties that put more risk on their shoulders. If you're that tendering company, what should you do?
I think it's really difficult, actually, and we have those conversations with our clients all the time. And I think one of the difficulties is, as I said at the end of just the introduction there, people have to be prepared to talk. The difficulty that some of our clients are having is when they're going back and they're trying to talk to some of these agencies, they're just not willing to have any dialogue on these points, and that's just wrong.
Is this because, for example, the Controller and Auditor General's report once a year highlights embarrassing failures of oversight, and then they go into the fetal position and overcompensate?
I don't know. I think, without being too controversial, I think a lot of it is driven by the lawyers actually in the background, and I think it's a misguided attempt to try and offload their clients' risk. But ultimately, it's not in anyone's interest if you have the risk sitting with people that aren't able to bear it or aren't able to fund it. So I think there. But again, maybe that's the need for some positive dialogue with the legal profession about what the landscape should look like.
Nasa, can I ask you, obviously you're driving a team of very skilled professionals. How widespread are groups like you? Is the industry taking this communication role seriously enough?
Yes, I mean, the industry is taking it seriously. The public sector and now the private sector are really prioritising public consultation and stakeholder engagement, and the sector is growing all of the time. We have taken on a lot of graduates who we have trained into project communications, and likewise we have recruited people from abroad who have worked on projects like High Speed 2 in the UK and in projects in Canada and Australia. So project communications is growing in Ireland. It is a huge sector in Australia and in Canada and in England as well, but it's becoming bigger and bigger here because, as I said, people are the centre of everything you're doing. And sorry, if I could add as well, like the project communications work that we do, we're never in a silo. We're embedded into integrated project teams with the engineers, the planners, the environmental scientists, the project managers. It's all one team working together in an integrated manner, because otherwise you will have a timeline that will just go askew or a budget that will go askew. It has to be, the comms has to be a part of the central project.
From the start.
In from the start, exactly, yeah.
I've got one more question because I'm running out of time, and I'm putting it to Amy. Amy, you're in college. You're seeing all the trends. You're adjusting the curriculum as new developments come. What are the career opportunities that AI and digitization open up when we're trying to attract people who haven't left a screen from the age of 5? Does that help if you tell them it's okay, you'll be at a computer?
Well, certainly digitisation is something that we're very much changing the curriculum towards, and at TU Dublin, one of our 3 pillars is partnership. And the best way, I would say, in influencing the curriculum for everybody out here is to approach universities and start talking to them. Tell them what is important in industry. Tell them what you want the graduates' skills to be, whether it's digitisation, AI competencies. And we will adjust the curriculum with your feedback. And you can get involved in any kind of small or large level. You can be involved in accreditation. You can be involved in project design, final year projects. We love to partner with people for those. And you can be actually deeply involved in new module design as well. So, you can feedback through partnership. You're all very welcome.
Well, I've got good news for everybody. We're going to go and grab our lunch now, and that's an opportunity to partner.
The thing